Boone Cartwright sat alone in his small cabin, the crackling fire in front of him the only thing keeping the chill at bay. The wind howled outside, pressing against the weathered wood of his ranch, but inside it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that always seemed to settle into a man's bones when he had too much time to think. He didn't need the world outside. Didn't need the company of others. Not anymore. It had been 8 years since Sarah, his wife, and little Emily had been taken from him. The memory still burned. Their faces, laughing and bright, came to him in flashes, but they were always out of reach, like smoke that slipped through his fingers no matter how hard he tried to hold on. His hands shook as he mended a bridle, but it wasn't from the cold. No, the cold had nothing on the chill that had settled in his heart years ago, a heart that had stopped beating for anyone but him. He had buried everything, locked it all away. The love, the hope, the dreams of a future with a family, all of it died with them. Boone glanced out the window. Snow was beginning to fall, thick and heavy, blanketing the world in white. It was beautiful in its own way, but also unforgiving, like life had been. He threw a few more logs onto the fire, leaning back in his chair staring at the flames. He had chosen this life, chosen to be alone, to push the world away. It was easier that way, safer, but something shifted in the air. He didn't know what it was, but it pressed against him, like a storm building on the horizon. Then suddenly there was a knock, 3 sharp raps on the door cutting through the silence. Boone froze. No one came to this ranch, not unless they had a reason. A damn good one. His fingers instinctively tightened around the rifle mounted on the wall. His heart began to pound, the old instincts flaring. "Who the hell is out there?" he muttered under his breath, standing up. He wiped his hands on his pants, but his mind was already racing. What did they want? What trouble had found him this time? The knock came again, louder this time. Desperate. Boone's heart skipped a beat. Something told him he wasn't going to like whatever was on the other side of that door. He walked slowly to the door, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders with each step. He gripped the handle, his breath steady, but his mind scattered. Then with a quick pull, he threw open the door, ready for whatever came next. Boone's hand was still on the door when he saw her. At first he thought she was just another shadow in the snow, something the storm had thrown up against his ranch. But then, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light spilling from inside, he saw her clearly. A girl, no older than 19, lying half-frozen in the snow just outside his porch. Her skin was as pale as the snow she lay in, her hair dark against the white, her body shivered, barely moving, as if the cold had wrapped its arms around her and refused to let go. Boone's heart skipped. He didn't move at first, just stared at her, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. For a moment, he was sure she was dead. She didn't look like someone who could survive this kind of cold. But then her chest rose, a shallow breath escaping her lips, and Boone knew he couldn't just leave her out there. He stepped outside without thinking. The cold hit him like a slap, biting at his face and hands. His boots crunched through the snow as he knelt beside her, careful not to disturb her too much. Her face was frozen, lips cracked and blue, eyes half open but glazed with pain. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at something else. The darkness maybe, or something he couldn't see, but she wasn't seeing him. Her eyes flickered, the slightest movement, but it was enough for Boone to feel his heart tighten. She was still alive. "Hell," he muttered to himself, more to break the silence than to answer any question. He didn't know why, but he didn't leave her there, didn't walk back inside like he should have. Everything in him screamed to turn away. The danger, the risk, the trouble a girl like her could bring. He was alone out here, in the middle of nowhere, in a world where men like him survived by being cautious, by keeping their distance. But something in her expression, something in the way she lay there, helpless, made him take a knee beside her. "Can you hear me?" Boone whispered, though he knew she likely couldn't. Her chest rose again, a jagged breath, and her eyes fluttered open just enough for him to see the pain in them. He didn't need to ask what had happened to her. He could tell by the way she was shivering, by the way her body refused to respond. She had been left here, abandoned to the storm. This wasn't a woman who had wandered into the wilderness by choice. No, this was someone who had been cast aside like a broken animal. Boone's fingers trembled as he touched her shoulder, shaking her lightly. "I can't just leave you out here," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The girl's lips parted, and she gave a quiet moan, barely audible over the howling wind. She was still conscious, barely, but she was alive. "Come on," Boone said. lifting her gently, his hands steady despite the fear gnawing at him. He could feel her weight as he pulled her against his chest, her body as cold as a stone, her skin like ice beneath his hands. But her eyes were the only thing that kept him from turning away. They were dark and full of something he couldn't explain, something that made him feel like he should do more than just take her in. He should save her. He moved her into the warmth of the cabin, his breath ragged from the cold, his muscles stiff from the effort. Once inside, Boone quickly set her down near the fire. He grabbed the thick wool blanket from his bedroll, the one he kept for himself on the coldest nights, and wrapped it around her fragile frame. She didn't respond. She didn't even flinch when he touched her. Her skin was too cold, her body too weak. But Boone didn't stop. He pulled the blanket tighter around her, wrapping it as best as he could, and sat back, watching her closely. She was breathing, slowly, steadily, but her body wasn't warming as quickly as he'd hoped. His heart pounded in his chest, anxiety tightening his throat. He sat beside her for what felt like hours, watching the fire burn low and the snow continue to fall outside, painting the world a ghostly white. The silence in the cabin seemed louder than the storm outside, but Boone didn't care. He couldn't leave her alone, couldn't just walk away from a person in need. Not even if she was Apache, not even if she was a stranger. Something about her eyes, the way they had looked at him, hollow yet full of pain, and yet also full of something else. Trust. She had trusted him. She had looked at him and let him help her, even though everything about her life must have told her to run from men like him. He didn't know why, but he couldn't just leave her. The past 8 years of solitude on this ranch had made him a man who avoided all contact, who kept to himself and didn't let anyone in. He had buried his feelings deep, turned away from the world, from his own memories. But in this moment, with her lying there, vulnerable and cold, something in him cracked open. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew he couldn't just walk away from her. He sat with her all night, until the storm outside had lost its fury. He watched her, waiting for her to wake, for her to show some sign of life other than her breath. But when she finally stirred, her eyes flickered open and she met his gaze. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. Pain, gratitude, confusion, and something else, something Boone couldn't name. But it was there, buried in her stare. "I'm Boone Cartwright," he said quietly, unsure of what to say, unsure of why he was still there. "You're safe now." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She didn't need to speak. Boone could see the thankfulness in her eyes, the trust that she was no longer alone in the world. But even as he helped her warm up by the fire, even as he watched her eyes slowly close again in exhaustion, Boone knew this wouldn't be the end of it. His life was about to change in ways he hadn't expected. Helping her wouldn't be as simple as he thought. He had opened the door to a world he had spent years avoiding, and now there was no going back. The storm outside had passed, but something much bigger was coming, and Boone was about to find out what it meant to open your heart to someone who had nothing left to lose. Boone sat in his worn chair, watching the fire crackle in the hearth, his eyes occasionally flicking to the girl wrapped in his thick wool blanket. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed was almost worse. It was the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy, like the weight of something unspoken hanging over them. He knew she was still alive. He had seen her chest rise and fall, her shallow breaths the only thing keeping her from the edge of death. But she hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. He didn't know if she was sleeping or if the cold had taken too much from her, but Boone wasn't going anywhere until she was awake. He had no reason to stay, no reason to put himself in harm's way, especially after everything that had happened. But when he looked at her, lying there so fragile and broken, something in him softened, something he thought had died a long time ago. She stirred. The movement was subtle at first, a slight shift of her head, the faintest flutter of her eyelids. Boone leaned forward, his heart beating a little faster than it should have. He had no idea who this girl was, where she came from, or what kind of trouble she had brought to his doorstep, but he couldn't help but feel responsible for her now. He had made the choice to help her, and that meant something. At least, it had to. Her eyes opened, dark and glazed with confusion. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize where she was. But when she finally focused on him, something flickered in her gaze, something Boone couldn't quite place. Boone leaned back, giving her space. He didn't want to crowd her, especially now that she was awake. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. "Hey," Boone said softly, his voice hoarse from the long night of silence. "You're safe now. You're all right." She didn't respond. She just stared at him, her eyes still wide, searching his face as if looking for something. Boone could feel her suspicion, thick in the air between them. He didn't know what kind of life she'd had before she ended up on his porch, but it was clear she wasn't used to kindness. Or maybe she just didn't know how to trust it. "I'm not here to hurt you," he added, trying to keep his voice steady, though something in him tightened. I saw you out there in the storm. You needed help." Her gaze never wavered. She didn't look scared, but she didn't look reassured either. Just cautious, a quiet kind of strength behind those dark eyes that Boone couldn't ignore. She looked at him like she was trying to figure out if he was telling the truth, or if he was just another man who would abandon her the moment she trusted him. Boone felt something shift in his chest. He hadn't expected this, not from her. He thought it would be easier, that she would be grateful for the warmth and the shelter, for the kindness he had shown her. But it wasn't that simple. "I'm not some kind of monster, all right?" Boone said, the words coming out rougher than he meant. "I didn't help you because I want something from you." He swallowed hard, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. "You can trust me. I'm not going to hurt you." She blinked, still studying him. Her gaze didn't soften, but it didn't harden either. It was like she was measuring him, weighing him against something only she could understand. He didn't know what kind of hell she'd been through, but whatever it was, it had taught her not to trust easily. Boone had seen that look before, in the eyes of men who'd lost everything, who'd been burned one too many times by the world. That mistrust was like a wall, built brick by brick over the years, until it was so thick nothing could break through it. "I'm not a savage," Boone muttered, almost to himself. "I ain't gonna hurt you." Her eyes flickered with something like confusion, but it wasn't just confusion, it was disbelief. She was trying to understand why a white man, a cowboy like him, would help her, an Apache woman, a stranger, a woman who probably had no reason to believe a word he said. She took a slow, deliberate breath. "Why?" she asked, the word barely audible, her voice raw and hoarse. Boone's throat tightened. Why? The answer was simple, yet complicated all at once. Why had he helped her? He could have left her out there in the storm. He could have shut the door and ignored her like everyone else would have, but he didn't. I didn't want you to die out there," Boone said, his voice softer now, as if the words weighed more than he expected. "I've seen death, up close. I don't want to see it again. Not like that." Her eyes shifted slightly, like she was processing his words, but it didn't reach her face. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him. That same quiet intensity in her gaze. He couldn't tell what she was thinking, but he could feel it. A distance, a wall she'd built that kept everyone out. Boone could feel it too. How much she wanted to pull away, how much she wanted to doubt him. But there was something else there too, buried beneath all that suspicion. A hint of gratitude. A quiet understanding. She didn't believe him. Not yet, but that didn't stop him from trying. "You'll be all right," Boone said, his voice almost a whisper. "You're safe here. No one's gonna hurt you. Not while I'm around." She didn't say anything to that, but Boone could see her body relax, just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to make him believe she might eventually trust him. Enough to make him think that maybe, just maybe, she would let him help her. And that was enough for him. Because for the first time in years, Boone felt like he was doing something right. The cabin was quiet now, save for the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Boone sat at the table, hands resting on the rough wood, staring into the flames. The girl, Ayanna, she had told him, was sitting by the hearth, wrapped in his blanket, still shivering but no longer as pale as before. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. But it wasn't enough. Not for Boone. Not anymore. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she had looked at him when he first helped her inside, like he was some kind of savior she couldn't understand. He had tried to explain, tried to make her believe that he wasn't like the men who had hurt her. But she wasn't buying it. Not yet. And maybe she never would. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, until Boone finally broke it. "You're awake now. You should be eating something." She didn't respond right away. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the fire, distant and lost, like she was somewhere else, far away from the small cabin, from him, from everything. Come on, Boone pressed. It's not much, but I can cook up something for you, just to get you back on your feet. Her gaze shifted to him slowly, and for the first time he saw something like understanding in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but understanding. She wasn't the frightened girl he had picked up in the snow anymore. She was more. "I'm not hungry," she said, her voice barely a whisper, the words heavy with something Boone couldn't quite place. "You should eat," Boone said, his tone soft but firm. He got up and moved toward the stove, grabbing a pot. "If you don't, you'll never get better." Ayanna watched him for a long time, the silence between them thickening with every passing moment. She was still cautious, still keeping him at arm's length, but there was something in the way she looked at him now that wasn't fear. It was curiosity. Finally, she spoke again. "Why did you help me?" Boone froze, his hand hovering over the pot. He hadn't expected that question, not like this, not so direct. He had thought about it a lot. What had driven him to take her in? Was it just a moment of kindness? Was he just doing what any decent man would do? Or was it something else? He set the pot down, the silence between them pressing in like the cold outside. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I just couldn't leave you out there. I've seen enough death to know when a person's got no chance. I wasn't gonna let you die in the snow." She didn't say anything at first, just watched him, and in the way she looked at him like she was reading him, Boone felt something stir. It wasn't just pity, wasn't just compassion, it was more. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her. Vulnerability, maybe, or even hope, but she wasn't ready to show it. Not yet. "You're different," she said, her voice quieter now. "I've seen men like you before, but they never do anything. They never help." "I'm not like the rest of them," Boone replied. "I don't know what's happened to you, but I won't be one of those men. I won't just stand by and watch you die. Not like that." She looked away from him then, her eyes distant once again. "It's too late for me. You don't know what I've been through. No man can change that." Boone's heart ached at her words. There was so much pain in her voice, so much loss. He didn't know her story. Hell, he didn't even know who she was. But the way she spoke, like she had been beaten by the world and everyone in it, made him want to hold her and make it all go away. But he couldn't. He didn't know how. "I know what it's like to lose," he said softly. "I've lost everything. My wife, my daughter, they're gone. And I've spent the last 8 years alone, not trusting anyone, not wanting to trust anyone. But sometimes you just gotta do the right thing, even when it's hard." Ayanna turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his for the first time in what felt like hours. "You think doing the right thing will fix it? Will bring them back?" Boone didn't have an answer. He didn't know if helping her would fix anything, but he knew he couldn't walk away. He couldn't walk away from her, from someone who had been abandoned just like he had. "I don't know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't leave you to suffer like that. Not again." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face, and in that moment, Boone saw something else there. Something he hadn't expected. It was gratitude, yes, but it was also something deeper. Something that made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a chance meeting after all. Maybe, for once, the world had brought them together for a reason. "I don't trust you," she said finally, her voice steady. "But I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to die out here." Boone nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was the first step towards something, and for the first time in years, he felt like maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. "Then we'll get you better," he said, moving back to the stove. "One step at a time." Ayanna didn't say anything more, but Boone could see the tiniest shift in her posture, like a door had opened just a crack. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him believe that maybe, just maybe, he was doing something right for once. The fire crackled on, the storm still raging outside, but inside, for the first time in a long time, there was a warmth that didn't come from the flames, and it felt like hope. Boone didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he was ready to find out. The storm had passed, but the tension hadn't left the air. Boone stood by the window, looking out into the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd heard them long before he saw them. The sound of hooves pounding against the frozen earth, the creak of leather saddles, the low murmurs of voices. They were close. Boone's hands gripped the edge of the window frame, his knuckles white. His mind raced. His eyes flicked to Ayanna, who was sitting quietly by the hearth, her eyes fixed on the fire. She hadn't said much since they'd spoken earlier, but he could feel the weight of her presence, the danger that hung over them both. "They're coming," Boone muttered under his breath. He didn't know who they were, but he didn't have to. He knew what they were. Soldiers. And soldiers didn't come to places like this for anything good. Boone had been alone for so long, hiding from the world and from his past. But now, the world had found him again, and it had come with the kind of danger he had hoped he would never face. The pounding of hooves grew louder, and Boone knew they were closing in on his ranch. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. He wasn't prepared for this, not like he had hoped. The ranch wasn't much. A small cabin, a few outbuildings, a well. Nothing that could withstand an army of soldiers, not even for a day. He glanced over his shoulder at Ayanna. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp, watching him closely. She knew what this meant. She had been running from these men for days, maybe longer. They weren't just soldiers, they were hunters, and the game was her. "They're here," Boone said, his voice low. "They won't stop until they find you, until they find us." Ayanna didn't move. She didn't say anything, but Boone could feel her fear, as tangible as the cold air in the room. He knew she had fought long and hard to survive, to get this far, but this was different. These weren't men who could be reasoned with. They were soldiers, trained to hunt, to kill. He couldn't let her go, not now, not after everything. But the decision wasn't easy. In fact, it was the hardest thing Boone had ever done. The world had given him two choices: protect her or protect himself. If he helped her, they both would die. There was no escaping this. The soldiers wouldn't just kill her, they would kill him too. He knew that. But he also knew that letting her go wasn't an option, not anymore. He'd already made that choice when he opened the door to her on that cold night, when he wrapped her in his blanket and promised her safety. How could he turn his back now? "God help me," Boone whispered. He ran his hand through his hair, his mind in turmoil. He felt the weight of the rifle in his hand, the cold steel of the barrel familiar but alien at the same time. It was an old friend, one he hadn't called upon in years, but one that would likely have to be used tonight. He moved quickly, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and turned to face Ayanna. She was still sitting by the fire, her gaze fixed on the flames, but he could see the slight tremble in her hands. She was afraid, and she had every reason to be. "I can't let them take you," Boone said, his voice rough with resolve. "I can't let them kill you, not after everything you've been through." Ayanna stood slowly, her eyes never leaving his. There was no anger in her gaze, no fear, just something else, something that made her stronger than he had ever imagined. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her silence told him everything. She was ready for whatever was coming. She had been fighting her whole life, and this was just another battle. Boone could feel the weight of his decision pressing on him. The fear was there, gnawing at his insides. The soldiers were close now, maybe minutes away. He had to make a choice, and he didn't have much time. He grabbed the rifle from the wall, his hands steady despite the turmoil inside him. The sound of horses grew louder, closer. He could almost hear their voices now, calling out to each other, searching for her, for them. The hunters were closing in. "This is it," Boone muttered to himself. "There's no turning back now." Ayanna moved silently toward the door, her movements calculated, practiced. She was ready for this. Boone wasn't sure he was, but he wasn't about to let her face this alone. "We fight," Boone said, his voice low, the weight of the decision sinking in. "Or we run, and I don't plan on running." He swung open the door, stepping outside into the biting cold of the night. The wind had died down, but the stillness felt like the calm before a storm. He could see the shadows of the riders now, their forms outlined against the night sky, moving closer, circling the ranch like wolves on the hunt. Boone's pulse quickened. He couldn't do this alone. He needed Ayanna. He needed her strength, her resolve. She had been through this before. She knew what to do. "You stay here," Boone said, his voice firm, looking back at her. "I'll draw them out. You take the back." Ayanna didn't argue. She didn't have to. She nodded once, a simple motion that told him she was ready. They both knew what had to be done. The soldiers were almost upon them now, their horses moving in perfect rhythm, their voices muffled by the distance. Boone stepped forward, his rifle in hand, and raised it. The leader of the group, a man in a worn uniform, saw him first. He didn't hesitate. "There he is!" the man shouted. "Get him!" Boone felt a surge of adrenaline, the old instincts kicking in. He didn't wait. He fired. The shot echoed across the ranch, and one of the riders fell from his horse, the others scattering in confusion. The chaos erupted quickly. Boone and Ayanna worked like two parts of a single machine, moving with the precision of people who had been forced to survive. Boone's heart raced as the soldiers closed in, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't. Ayanna had already taken position behind the barn, her movements swift and silent. She had weapons, she had a plan, and Boone was going to make sure they both survived. Another rider fell as Boone fired again, and another. But there were still too many. The horses charged, the soldiers pushing forward, determined to finish what they had started. Boone's hand tightened on the rifle as he moved, the world narrowing to the men in front of him, the gunfire, and the rush of his own blood. "Come on," he muttered, his breath coming in sharp, frozen bursts. "Come on." And then, just as the last of the soldiers charged forward, Boone heard Ayanna's voice, calm and steady, shouting over the chaos. "They're leaving!" And just like that, they were gone. The storm outside had passed, and so had the danger. For now, Boone lowered the rifle, his heart still pounding, his body trembling from the fight. They had won. They had survived. But the battle was far from over. The night after the soldiers had left, the air in Boone's cabin felt different. The tension had shifted, but not in a way that made it easier to breathe. The storm outside had passed, but there was still something heavy in the air. Ayanna sat by the hearth, staring into the fire as if it held all the answers she'd been keeping locked inside. Boone watched her, still trying to figure out what to say, what to do. He had known her for less than a week, but it felt like a lifetime. The woman who had knocked on his door that stormy night, desperate and shivering, was no longer just a stranger to him. She was someone he felt responsible for now, and that responsibility ran deeper than he had expected. "Why don't you sit?" Boone finally said, breaking the silence. "You don't have to stand there." Ayanna didn't respond immediately, but her eyes flickered to him. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and moved to the chair opposite him. Her movements were stiff, like someone who had been too cautious for too long, afraid to let their guard down. Boone took a slow breath, his heart heavy with a mix of curiosity and concern. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said, his voice gruff but soft. "But I need to understand. I need to know what I'm up against, what you've been through." Ayanna's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a long moment there was nothing but the sound of the fire crackling between them. She was quiet, her eyes focused on the flickering flames, but Boone could feel the weight of the silence pressing in. It was the kind of silence that held so much unsaid, so much pain, that it threatened to swallow them whole. Finally she spoke, her voice low and hesitant. "You think you know what it's like, to lose everything." She paused, her hands curling into fists in her lap. "But you don't. You have no idea." Boone's chest tightened at the words, but he didn't interrupt her. She was speaking now, and that was all that mattered. He needed to listen. "My family." She swallowed hard, her voice thick with emotion. "My people. They're all gone. My father, my brothers, my cousins, they died in the wars. Not just the fighting, but the hunger, the sickness. The soldiers came and they took everything. The land, the homes. They killed our men, and the women." Ayanna's voice faltered, but she pressed on. "The women had to watch, and we were left with nothing." Boone leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on her. "You fought back." She nodded, her eyes hardening. "We had to. There was no other choice. The soldiers came to burn our village, to take our children, to break our spirit. So we fought. Some of us ran, some of us hid, but the rest, we fought, even when we knew we'd lose." Boone's heart sank. He could see it in her eyes now, the haunted look of someone who had lived through hell and come out scarred. This wasn't just some girl running from the law. This was a woman who had watched her world burn, who had seen her family torn apart, and who had fought to survive. She wasn't just running for herself, she was running for everything she had lost. "That's why you don't trust me," Boone said quietly, his voice filled with understanding. "You've seen too many men who've hurt you, who've taken everything from you. Why would you trust anyone, especially a white man?" Ayana's gaze flickered up to meet his, and for the first time, he saw something different in her eyes. Not just the hardness, the caution, but something else, something raw, something that made her look like she was finally letting her guard down, just a little. "You're right," she said, her voice quieter now. "I don't trust you. Not yet. But I don't trust anyone." Boone nodded, his mind racing as he processed her words. He had been right about one thing. She wasn't just a victim. She was a warrior, someone who had been forced to fight for her survival. And in a way, that made her stronger than anyone he had ever known. He stood up, moving slowly toward the fire, the warmth of the flames reminding him of the long, cold nights he had spent alone, nights where he had buried his memories, buried his pain. But something about Ayana made him feel like maybe he didn't have to carry that burden alone anymore. Maybe she could understand. "I don't know what happened to you," Boone said, turning back to her. "But I do know one thing. I'll protect you. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Ayana's eyes searched his face, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The way she looked at him now, differently than before, was enough. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice fragile. "You don't understand what it means to be hunted, to have your entire life torn apart, to watch everyone you love die. I'm not like you. I can't be saved. No one can." Boone felt a pang of sadness shoot through him, but he shook his head. "I don't care about what's happened in the past. All I care about is what happens now. What happens next." He moved closer to her, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Her eyes stayed on him, searching, unsure, but not afraid. "You don't have to face this alone," Boone said, his voice low and steady. "As long as I'm breathing, I'll make sure you're not alone." Ayana didn't answer at first. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. But then, slowly, she nodded. The slightest movement, but it was enough. "I don't know what to do with this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to trust again, but you're different." "You're?" Boone's heart skipped a beat at her words. He wasn't sure what that meant, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. "I don't expect you to trust me," he said softly, his voice rough. "But I'll prove it to you, Ayana. Every day. I'll show you I'm not like the rest of them." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Boone felt something shift, like a door had opened, just a crack, and through it, he could see a future, one that wasn't filled with fear, but with the possibility of something more, something worth fighting for. Ayana looked down, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. She was still scared. He could see it in the way she held herself. But now, there was something else there too. A glimmer of hope. A spark that maybe, just maybe, she could let herself believe in again. And for the first time in years, Boone believed it too. Boone stood in the doorway, staring out at the horizon. The wind had died down, but the stillness felt like the calm before a storm. The sound of hooves in the distance reached him, and his heart sank. He didn't need to see them to know who they were. They were close. Too close. He had been waiting for this moment, knowing it would come sooner or later. The soldiers, the hunters, the men who had come for Ayana, and by extension, for him. They were coming to finish what they started. And now, Boone had to decide. The air inside the cabin was thick with tension. Ayana stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the approaching dust cloud. She didn't say anything, but Boone could feel the weight of her silence. She knew as well as he did that this was the end of the road. Boone's hand tightened around the rifle in his grip. He had thought about this moment 100 times since he had opened his door to her that stormy night. He had known the risks from the start. Helping her had dragged him into a fight he couldn't escape. But now, standing there in the cold with the soldiers closing in, he knew what he had to do. There was no running from this. Not anymore. "You have to go," Boone said, his voice hoarse. I'll hold them off. You can still escape." Ayana turned to him, her eyes wide, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. The look on her face said everything. Boone's chest tightened as he realized the truth. He wasn't going to let her go. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. Not after everything. Not after the past few days. After everything they had been through together. He had spent years running from his past, from the pain, from the memories of his family. But when he looked at Ayana, he realized something. He wasn't running anymore. The soldiers were almost here. Boone could hear the sound of their horses now, their voices carried on the wind. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he felt the weight of the rifle in his hands. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them take her, not without a fight. "I won't leave you," Boone said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "I'll stand with you, no matter what." Ayana looked at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't the distrust he had seen before. It was something else, something softer, something more like hope. "I'll protect you," Boone said, his words low but fierce. "I'll protect you, Ayana, even if it costs me my life." She nodded, her jaw tight, but there was a spark in her eyes now. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something more. They were in this together, no matter what. The soldiers were closing in fast, but Boone didn't flinch. He turned to the rifle and checked the chamber, making sure it was loaded. His fingers were steady now, more so than they had been in years. He wasn't the same man who had closed himself off from the world. He wasn't the same man who had hidden from his past. He was someone else now. Boone walked toward the front of the cabin, his boots silent on the wooden floor. The storm had passed, but the battle was just beginning. He couldn't change the past, but he could protect what was in front of him. He could protect Ayana. "I've lived with the ghosts of my past long enough," Boone said, almost to himself. "I'm not going to run anymore. Not from you. Not from them." He took a deep breath and stepped outside, the cold air biting at his skin. The soldiers were coming over the ridge now, their shadows growing longer in the setting sun. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Boone squared his shoulders, his rifle in hand, and faced the horizon. He was ready. "I've lived through the loneliness," Boone muttered, his voice almost a whisper. "But if I have to die to protect you, Ayana, I'll do it, because it's the right thing to do." The sound of the soldiers grew louder, closer. He could see the first rider now, a tall man with a hardened face, his eyes scanning the horizon, but they weren't looking for him yet. "Stay back," Boone said to Ayana, not turning to face her. "Stay in the cabin. You're not a part of this anymore." She didn't argue. She didn't need to. She was already by the back door, her hand on the handle, waiting for his signal. The moment the soldiers came into view, Boone raised his rifle, his finger steady on the trigger. He was done running, done hiding, done pretending he was someone he wasn't. He aimed carefully, and with a steady breath, he fired. The shot rang out, echoing in the quiet of the valley. The first soldier dropped from his horse, a shot to the chest. The others scattered, confusion and panic taking over as they realized they weren't dealing with the helpless rancher they had expected. Boone didn't wait for them to regroup. He fired again, and another soldier went down. It was a fight, but it wasn't one he could win by himself. He needed Ayana, and he wasn't going to let her down. As the remaining soldiers charged forward, Boone's heart was calm, his mind clear. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The soldiers weren't his enemy anymore. The real enemy was the fear, the doubt, the pain of all the years he had spent running. That was what he was fighting now. And as the first soldier got close, Boone stepped into the open, his rifle raised, ready for whatever came next. "I'm not running," Boone muttered, the words almost a prayer. "Not anymore." The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Reflection and life lessons from the story. The tale of Boone Cartwright and Ayana is one that explores themes of courage, trust, and the weight of past pain. It's a Wild West story filled with emotional intensity, rich with the rawness of human experiences, and is, at its core, about redemption. As I reflect on their journey, I realize that this story offers much more than just an adventurous ride through the desert. It speaks to the struggles we all face in our personal lives and provides lessons on how we can navigate them. The power of compassion in times of hardship. One of the most striking aspects of this story is Boone's decision to help Ayana despite the risks involved. In a world where survival often means protecting oneself and distancing from others, Boone chooses compassion over fear. He sees a person in need and steps up to help, even when it means confronting his own demons and past fears. In our own lives, we often find ourselves in situations where helping someone or standing up for what's right could put us at risk. But the truth is, it's during these moments that our humanity shines brightest. Boone's decision shows us that it is not the circumstances that define us, but how we choose to respond to them. In the face of adversity, choosing compassion can lead to profound personal growth. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't the easiest choice, but it's the one that allows us to move forward with integrity. The importance of trust and vulnerability. Ayana's story is one of deep trauma. She's been hurt, abandoned, and betrayed by the very people she should have been able to trust. Her journey reflects the human struggle of learning to trust again after being hurt, and her initial skepticism towards Boone is a powerful reminder of how difficult it is to let others in after pain. Yet, in the process of helping her, Boone doesn't just give her shelter, he gives her something far more valuable. He shows her that there are people who care, who will stand by her even when the world has taught her to be wary. Trust is not something easily earned, especially for those who have been through hardships. But this story reminds us that trust is the foundation of any meaningful relationship. Whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, or even the relationships we have with ourselves, trust is something that must be nurtured and respected. In our own lives, we often struggle with the decision to open up, to let others in, or to trust those who have not yet proven themselves. Ayana's journey shows us that while it is difficult to trust again after being hurt, it is possible, and it is worth the effort. Trusting others is how we begin to heal, how we allow love and care back into our lives. Overcoming the past to move forward. Boone's journey is one of escaping the ghosts of his past. His wife and daughter's deaths haunt him, and the grief he feels keeps him locked in a cycle of isolation. But it's only when he decides to face the present, to stand up for what's right, that he begins to find redemption. So many of us carry burdens from the past, regrets, guilt, and old wounds that shape our choices and prevent us from moving forward. The weight of the past often keeps us trapped, unable to fully embrace the opportunities before us. Boone's story teaches us that in order to grow, we must confront our past and stop letting it control us. Only by acknowledging our pain and choosing to move beyond it can we truly live in the present and create a future of meaning and purpose. In our own lives, it's easy to dwell on past mistakes or losses, but the lesson here is clear. The past doesn't define us. How we choose to move forward does. If we spend too much time holding on to the past, we miss out on the opportunities to heal and grow. The courage to stand up for what's right. When Boone and Ayana face the soldiers, the ultimate test of their courage arrives. Boone's choice to stand with Ayana, to defend her despite the odds, is a pivotal moment in the story. It's not just a fight against the soldiers, it's a fight against the fear that has held Boone captive for years. This moment speaks to the power of standing up for what's right, even when the world seems stacked against you. It's easy to be passive, to avoid conflict, and to let injustice slide by. But Boone's courage shows us that sometimes we must make a stand. Whether it's standing up for someone else or standing up for our own beliefs, courage is what allows us to live authentically. In our daily lives, we often face situations where we need to decide whether to act or to remain silent. Whether it's at work, in our personal relationships, or even in our communities, we must make a choice. Do we confront what's wrong, or do we let it slide? Boone's decision to fight is a powerful reminder that standing up for what's right is not just an act of bravery, but also an act of integrity. It is through action, not passivity, that we make the world a better place, embracing our shared humanity. At the heart of the story is the idea that we are all connected, despite our differences. Boone and Ayana come from completely different worlds. He, a white rancher, she, an Apache woman who has fought for her survival. But when they choose to fight for each other, they transcend their cultural divides. They recognize each other's humanity and decide that compassion is stronger than fear. In a world often divided by race, culture, and background, Boone and Ayana's story shows us the importance of seeing each other as fellow human beings rather than as enemies. It teaches us that empathy is what bridges the gap between us, and that when we work together, we can overcome even the greatest challenges. This is a lesson we can apply in every aspect of our lives, whether it's with people who have different beliefs, backgrounds, or experiences. Recognizing our shared humanity is the key to creating a more compassionate world. As Boone's journey comes to a close, and he finally chooses to stand up for Ayanna, we are left with a powerful message. The life we live is shaped by the choices we make in the face of fear, pain, and adversity. This story teaches us that we must choose to live with courage, with compassion, and with integrity. It reminds us that we have the power to change our lives and the lives of those around us, but it requires us to act. We must choose to trust, to fight for what's right, and to never let the past hold us back. If this story resonated with you, if it inspired you to think about your own choices and the ways you can bring more compassion and courage into your life, then I encourage you to take action today. Stand up for someone, confront the fears that have been holding you back, and choose to be a force for good in the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that challenge us, inspire us, and show us what it means to truly live.